Well, thank you for being here. I must say that I do love the record.
Thank you.
I think it is an interesting blend of indie sensibilities here in North America and whatever is going on in Europe right now, because it's really smooth, and I love the way your voice blends with your instrumentation. It's terrific.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So let's talk a bit about the origins of the 100. You have to get the in there, right?
Of course, yes.
Why do we have to say the 100 in the hands? What's the origin of the name?
It comes from the name of a battle that Crazy Horse fought in. It was a Lakota battle, and it's one of the only ones that they won. And the story behind it is that the night before, the shaman rode in and out of their camp and said, "I've got too many in my hands. I've got 100 in the hands." And the next day they killed nearly 100 U.S. soldiers, so it became the Battle of the 100 in the hands.
Okay. Now, if you abbreviate that into fifth,
Yes.
which is the name of your magazine, your online magazine, which is really cool. We'll talk about that in a second. But if you abbreviate, I'm sure you know what the Urban Dictionary says, right? Mm-hmm. That it's extremely cool or extremely evil. So it has multiple meanings. I like that.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea where that came from, or was that just accidental?
It was just a lucky coincidence, really. But it is very cool that it has its own meaning. That is also, I don't know, something we would.
I kind of want to make a
attach
shirt that
ourselves
says "Boom Sis, Boom Sis, Boom Sis," but Eleanor won't let me do it yet.
Well, your online presence is pretty. What's the word I want to use? Robust. With your website, obviously, the online world's really important to you. Talk a bit about that and how much you spend.
You mean the zine specifically?
The zine specifically, yeah.
Yeah, it was just something when we started the band, we were really conscious that we wanted to. I mean, you have to have a website if you're a band, but it gets pretty boring just talking about yourself all the time. So we had lots of friends who were making music, and there were other people who we would love to talk to. So we just thought it would be a great way to do that, to facilitate all those things.
It is a cool thing because you go there expecting stuff about the band, which you get, but then you get a whole bunch of other things as well.
Yeah, and it's really fun reaching out to people and making new
Yeah.
friends and things.
I think it's also fun because we live in New York City, and you're always meeting people and becoming friends with people who are doing really interesting, cool things. And because we're kind of in a creative world, a lot of those people are creative and are working on creative projects. And so this is an opportunity to ask them questions and get them to talk about their projects more, and then also to reach out to people that we think are interesting that we haven't met yet, and ask them questions. And it's fun and exciting for us. I think it's part of why we like doing what we do, is being able to meet and interact with other people who are creative and exciting.
It's interesting that we've, at least from our perspective outside of New York City, that there's been what appears to be a renaissance of the music scene.
It's pretty fun, and it's weird because when we go around, everyone is always asking us about it, but obviously when you're in the place you are, you don't really think of it in that sense. But I've been in New York long enough that when I first was there were no bands at all. And that whole first wave of bands that all came out at the same time, and it was all people who I just knew from kind of going to dance parties and people hanging out. All of a sudden everyone had a band. So there was that first wave who wasn't even thinking beyond New York. It was just kind of, let's do it for ourselves.
Bands like who?
The Yeah-Yeahs and Interpol and that whole wave,
Right.
Rapture. And then that obviously made New York a spot on the map again for bands, and more bands started moving there to be a band.
Well, there's a lot of gentrification, or everybody's moved to Brooklyn too, because it's cheaper. And by default, Brooklyn has ended up with this, I guess, a scene, or at least a large concentration of musicians in a small area.
Yeah.
I would say I would say that's what it is. It's a large concentration of bands. Most of the bands we don't know, some of them we do. It's just, I think it's a place that is friendly to people in bands, musicians. There are a lot of practice spaces, there are a lot of venues, everything is nearby, there are a couple great music shops.
But it's all kind of grown up around the band. It's been like, it's kind of created itself in that way. When I first moved there was nowhere for a band to practice. I always thought you couldn't have a band in New York because there's no garages. But
good point. Never thought of that.
but everyone started moving to Brooklyn, and there are plenty of spaces to practice in Brooklyn, so that kind of made sense.
And there's a lot of warehouse space in Williamsburg specifically, so that became attractive for bands because you could get bigger.
Let's talk about your sound. Where did you? What are your influences? Where did you come up with? You sound different than a lot of bands these days. I mean, there's a much more. Well, like at the beginning, we talked about it being more of a European feel in some ways, and certainly a lot more sophisticated than you hear from a lot of indie bands.
Thanks.
So where did that come from?
I'm not really sure. We were listening to a lot of different things, and there was definitely a common area that we were both excited by, and a lot of that had to do more with sort of pop sensibilities that neither of us had really played with too much before. But we both kind of come from, I don't know, more weirdo places, so it was kind of looking for music that you could relate to in that way. But we were listening to a lot of like early ska and dub and classic house, and
I'd say, our tastes are really varied, and we both have made music for a while before this band. So it's sometimes hard to say or tell which influences are most relevant to what we're doing right now. There's certain things I loved when I was a teenager, there are things I was working on 4 years ago when we didn't even know each other, and there's a lot of stuff that we've been listening to a lot since we met. And I would say, yeah, definitely more kind of like classic amazing pop tunes, like a Michael Jackson song, or
yeah, more like kind of like an avant strain of pop, going from like Phil Spector to Timbaland, with people who are like really pushing the sonic idea, but framing it around, essentially just a folk song, as opposed to like top 40 pop or whatever is the latest thing. Well,
I'm encouraged and pleased that there is seems to be a wave or a rediscovering of non-guitar based bands. There's you, there would be White Lies, there would be Delphic, who are all this smooth, sophisticated stuff that reminds me a lot of a certain genre of music that was around in the early 80s. I mean, the technology has come a long way and the sounds are a lot more modern than what you would hear back then. But then we had a bunch of bands who were into programming, who were into sounds, who were into textures, unlike we saw with guitar heavy bands. Mm-hmm. So it may be swinging that way a little bit, and I think that you guys are certainly on the forefront of that.
Thanks.
Well, I appreciate you coming in.
Oh, thanks for having us.
And I know that we're going to get a performance here of some sort.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Well, good luck with the record. Thank God it's finally out. Because I have to go to some certain, well, we won't talk about it, but I'm glad it's out, and I'll be doing well with it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Explore Music wears English Laundry apparel.